Gunnar Henderson had a little injury scare. Plus, we have an update on the Royals bullpen. Let's discuss on Fantasy Baseball Today Express. Welcome into FBT Express on Friday, February 28th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Chris Towers, and let's take a look at some news and notes, some recent spring training updates. And Gunnar Henderson was removed Thursday with lower right side soreness. Apparently, he suffered the injury while catching a line drive. He hit the ground pretty hard. Sounds like he is not going for an MRI. Chris, any concern at all here on Gunnar Henderson?
Not right now. Well, we'll keep an eye on it, and maybe over the weekend he doesn't get back into games or he doesn't progress the way they hoped, and we'll take a look at it. But right now, based on what we know, it doesn't sound like there's much to be concerned about here. So I'm not gonna, move Gunnar Henderson down. Even if I was drafting this weekend, I don't think, maybe I take him 6th instead of 5th or 7th, but I'm not too concerned.
Yeah, and completely different injuries. Last season in spring, he was dealing with a left oblique strain early on in spring, and he was fine by the time the season came around, and he had an amazing season. So I think he should be fine, assuming everything we know right now. An update on the Royals bullpen. Carlos Estevez is dealing with mild lower back tightness. Their manager, Matt Quattraro, believes there's still plenty of time for Estevez to appear in 6 to 7 outings later in camp before the season starts. And then we learned that they plan to use Lucas Erceg in the highest leverage spots this upcoming season, whether that be the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning with save opportunities. And that is according to Ann Rogers, who covers the Royals for MLB.com. So, Chris, do you plan to lower Carlos Estevez at all and maybe boost up Lucas Erceg after this report?
Yeah, I think before this, they were separated by about 60 spots. So I had Estevez in like the 180 range and Erceg in like the 240 range. So I still thought Erceg was someone who should be drafted in most leagues. Now I'm going to just kind of mush them together in like the 200 range. And, I think Erceg's the better pitcher. I think we kind of all agree on that one. So I'm totally willing to take him ahead, especially if, the highest leverage situation is typically the 9th inning. And so if you get to the 7th inning and there's a high leverage situation, maybe he uses him then. There are a lot of times when there's just no particularly high leverage situation and you get to the 9th and that's it. And teams will just use their guys there. So I don't think Lucas Erceg is likely to get 40 saves this season, but 25 and really good ratios, that seems pretty reasonable.
Do you plan to now rank Lucas Erceg ahead of Carlos Estevez?
Yeah, I'll have him. They'll be in the same range, but I'll have Erceg ahead.
All right. Zach Neto will not be ready for opening day, but should make his season debut soon after that. In April, he's rehabbing a shoulder surgery from the offseason. And Nico Hoerner will not travel with the Cubs to Japan for their 2-game series, which starts on March 18th. He's still rehabbing flexor tendon surgery he had back in October. They're saying Hoerner still has a chance to be ready for the team's domestic season opener on March 27th. Chris, I feel like this news was kind of expected, but do you plan to lower either Neto or Hoerner after these reports?
I actually think the Hoerner news in particular is good news because it wasn't clear he was even going to be ready for the second opening day. Remember, they open on March 18th in Japan. He's not going to travel with the team. What it sounds like, though, is the primary reason they don't want him to travel with the team is because they want him to get game reps before the second opening day, which is on March 27th, along with everyone else. They have, I think, 5 spring training games after the games in Tokyo. So if he's ready by March 27th, that's 160 games, right? Like he might miss 2 games. That doesn't sound too concerning. We don't know if the injury is going to linger and limit him. He didn't run early on last season, but ended up with pretty decent numbers. I think Nico Hoerner at his current his current price is a pretty good value. Neto, I'm more concerned about the guy coming back from shoulder surgery, especially because his underlying stats didn't really back up what he did last season anyway. So I think there's a lot to be skeptical about, even with, assuming perfect health. Knowing that he's not 100% right now and likely won't be on opening day, I still think Neto's just more of a after the 200th pick kind of guy.
All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll be back right after this.
The clock never stops. Relive the greatest moments with uninterrupted highlights and more.
It's Gareth Bale! Ronaldo! Wonderful goal!
On the UEFA Champions League channel. Streaming free.
Welcome back in FBT Express. We're going over the latest spring training updates, and Brandon Woodruff threw a simulated game of about 30 pitches on Thursday. Chris, do you think that Woodruff will be ready for opening day?
I think there's a chance. When he's been asked about it, it sounds like that's his plan still. He had a mostly normal offseason, but he's still a little behind schedule, only throwing 30 pitch simulated games, hasn't been facing batters yet. I would say it's 50-50 for opening day. The bigger question is just, do we care? And that's going to be harder to answer until we actually see him in a game, preferably with Statcast data so we can see what the fastball looks like, where the velocity is. Sounds like he's been more sitting 92. This is a guy who used to average 95, 96 with his fastball. And Brandon Woodruff relied on his fastballs a lot. He was a very fastball dependent pitcher. So if those have lost 3 or 4 miles per hour coming back from shoulder surgery, it's going to be really hard for him to matter for fantasy. So at this point, just a late round stash in a 12-team league.
And the A's are open to Tyler Soderstrom serving as their backup catcher this season. He's also projected to be their primary first baseman. So Soderstrom drafted as a catcher. He was a catcher in the minors. He's transitioned over to first base. But Chris, if he's primary first baseman and playing backup catcher for the A's, he could gain that eligibility at by the end of April or sometime in May. It would be pretty fun for fantasy.
Yeah, that's the thing I've been skeptical about Soderstrom as a late round sleeper if he's only first base eligible, because the bar at first base is just a lot higher than it is at catcher, even for corner infielders, even in a 15-team league, the bar is a lot higher. And so when you're talking about him being only first base eligible, he's really going to have to hit. He's going to have to hit 250 with 20 plus homers to really matter as a first baseman. Well, if he does that and he's a catcher, that starts to be really interesting. That's where we talk about Wilson Contreras making the move to first base. If Soderstrom's going to play 5 or 6 times a week, that's as much as most, high-end catchers are going to play. And he has that 20 homer potential. That starts to get really interesting for a catcher. So I was not super in on Soderstrom before this. Now I am willing to put him in my late round, preferably bench. I wouldn't want to start him as a corner infielder, but if I can get him on my bench, I would love that.
Yeah, those deeper mixed leagues as a bench option, maybe a corner infielder just for some pop. I wrote him up in Breakouts 1.0. I like the underlying skills. He hits the ball really hard. He barrels it up. In theory, should be a better offensive environment for the A's hitters this upcoming season. And I think maybe their lineup could be okay, not as terrible as years past. So, a little bit of a sneaky option there with Tyler Soderstrom. For more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to our full-length podcast, Fantasy Baseball Today, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today Express, and we will be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.